This is Bill Bush from Rockpoint Church, and I've critiqued some other aspects of this sermon he's preaching today because it is so exemplary of the typical kind of real negative side of what evangelical conservative Christians sometimes say about LGBTQ Christians. And this is like really going to help you see why so much of what they say is destructive and actually even deceitful. So take a look.
But the truth in love is what we need to speak. And if you notice, when Jesus says speak the truth in love,
Jesus never said to speak the truth in love. It was Paul.
The key thing is truth. You
Based
use
on
love.
What? You use love. Love is a tool. It's not the foundation and the bedrock of all theology, like Jesus said. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two rest the law and the prophets. No. Love is just a tool. Got to use it. Use it.
Not avoiding truth that you need to know. Now, here's what's weird about this. A lot of people say this is growing because there's always been a lot more people that struggled, and it was just in society, it was shameful, so you hide it. There's always a little bit of that. But that's how people currently identify. So you don't find the older generations well, now that it's okay, I'm coming out. It's rapidly growing because it's being celebrated. It's not just because people always were and they needed to come out, because there was a study done in Sweden.
Okay, we're going to get to that Sweden study in a minute. I've talked about these Sweden and Scandinavia studies before. But real quick, so what he's saying is that it's so confusing how he's even getting to this conclusion. He's saying that people are coming out because it's celebrated and they're indulging in sin. I think it's what he's getting at. Not because they're like actually have been gay people all along and they've been scared to come out. Of course not. That couldn't be the case. And why does he say that couldn't be the case? Because older people aren't coming out now. Okay, I'm going to show you this graph right here. So this is from the Gallup poll, and it doesn't go a long ways back, but it goes back to 2012, and it shows the different generations and how they have come out, like how many of them have come out. And yeah, like you can see the number for Gen Z is super high. The number of millennials, like it's increased a lot. The number of millennials have increased some. And the older generations have stayed lower. So he says, well, obviously that means it's just because it's being celebrated. It's not because people have always been gay. Like people just want to do it because it's cool, I guess, is what he's saying. Anyway, so there is another way to interpret this data. And that's that, look, like if you did have a situation where there was massive stigma and it's been getting better, you would expect to see a graph that is exactly like this, where the older a person is, the less likely they are to be out. And that is exactly what you see. As society has gradually become more accepting, more people in each generation have come out. So, yeah, he's just kind of trying to diminish the legitimacy of people identifying as LGBT and saying it's not really who people are. It's just being celebrated, and so people are indulging in this sinful thing, I guess. So this is an example, apparently, of him using love. Now let's see more as he talks about the Sweden study. Hey, talking about these things is great and very important. One organization that has been pioneering this kind of work for over 40 years is Seventh-day Adventist Kinship International. They have conferences, they have resources, YouTube channel. You can become a member. They have groups. They have all kinds of support. Check them out in my description below.
It's not just because people always were and they needed to come out, because there was a study done in Sweden. If you think it's just because of persecution, first of all, alternate lifestyles has not been persecuted in this country for a long time. It's flipped a while ago.
Okay, there is still systemic issues for LGBT people. There are places where you can be fired legally for being LGBT. By the way, Religious people have had protections against being fired for their religion in place since the Civil Rights Act, which was in the 60s. So, but LGBTQ people do not have those rights. It was confirmed, it was kind of demonstrated at the Supreme Court that somebody did get reparations for being fired for being gay, but because of the court we have now, that could easily be overturned at any time. It probably will be. So there's lots of places where you can get fired for being gay or lesbian or bisexual, and even more places where you can get fired for being transgender. There is documented, if this man knew research at all, he would know that there is housing discrimination that happens very commonly against LGBT people, workplace discrimination, all kinds of things, harassment. Kids get harassed, children get kicked out of their homes, get harassed and rejected by their parents. A large percentage of our society thinks it's morally wrong for people to be in same-sex relationships. Nobody thinks that of heterosexual people. So if you want to try to put it on the same par, as if because some people are celebrating us because they want to see these things change and there's a concerted effort to change, does not mean that things have changed and it's easy to be LGBT. Like, this is incredibly ignorant. I talk to people all the time who experience severe rejection and are maligned by their families. I get called horrible things constantly. If you look at my comments, like, I have to delete comments about killing queer people sometimes. Like, this is a part of my life on a regular basis. And he wants to say that there is no discrimination anymore towards us. This is simply false. This is simply false. And it really is a demonstration of the idea that for him, love is something that you use, not something that's at the core of your being. This is not someone who has a lot of empathy and care and wants to really understand what the experience is of LGBTQ people, because if he had any interest in that whatsoever, he would not say these things. Now let's look at the Sweden study again.
It's actually celebrate. We know that. Our high schoolers, so you talk to any one of our youth pastors, I go, it's hard because it is cheered to accept that I'm going to take on a different lifestyle. It's exactly what the Bible says is happening. And so you're thinking, okay, if it's not the shame of hiding and the guilt, people thought things would be better. But we have known historically in this country that if people that struggle with sexual identity, which you shouldn't find your identity in it, that's really what I think the struggle is. But when you struggle with thinking, I want this alternate, I'm struggling with my gender, I'm struggling with my sexual, what I'm attracted to, I'm struggling with that. They find that people that are struggling with that have like about 6 to 8 times the rate of depression and suicide as other people. And the answer has always been, well, because they've had to hide in fear and shame. Well, then you got to explain Sweden and the Nordic, because they went all-inclusive decades ago. Matter of fact, what I just said, I would be put in jail if I was preaching this in Sweden. In 2009, it's a hate speech law. I can't say this if I was a pastor there. I would be jailed. So not only did they go all...
Okay, hold on a second. I would be jailed. Let's talk about this law in Sweden that supposedly means he couldn't preach this sermon. So since that law has passed, and I agree, I don't think that law should have been passed. I don't think it should be on the books. But since that law has passed, there has been exactly one person who was charged with it, because that person said that LGBTQ people were a cancerous tumor in society, that it was an aberration similar to pedophilia, and that tolerance of LGBTQ people was going to cause natural disasters to happen in the country. None of these things are things that this man said. So, no, I mean, he could preach this sermon in Sweden. But the thing is, that man was charged, but he was acquitted. The courts found essentially that law was baseless. So he's either misinformed or he's lying. That's what this guy is doing right here. This is not the case in Sweden. And in fact, that was a sermon that was preached in Sweden, saying that LGBTQ people are a tumorous cancer, aberrant in a way that is comparable to pedophilia, which, by the way, I've lost count of how many times I've been told that myself. Heterosexual people never have to hear this, ever. So yeah, like, some people are upset with Christians for saying these things to LGBTQ people. You want to make that equivalent to being an LGBTQ person? It just doesn't make any sense. Again, this is what happens when you think of love as a tool for your theology. and for preaching the truth. You come up with this kind of thing. And he's actually playing pretty fast and loose with the truth here, saying things that just aren't true. So let's get back to it.
In celebrating and accepting it, they're so accepting, they're so past this issue, there is no persecution at all. Matter of fact, you are persecuted, you're in trouble if you would disagree. And guess what their suicide and depression rate is amongst people of alternate lifestyles to this day? 4 to 6 times the average of everyone else. Why?
Okay, taking bets on how many of you think that what he just said just now, is true. Here's the thing. I'm going to give you the information here in a moment, but he didn't provide any links to his sources in any of this. I scoured his webpage, nothing. I sent an email to his church and asked for these references, which I'm getting this video done late partly because I wanted to give him plenty of time to respond. Nothing. So he's making baseless claims that he refuses to give. He's not, this is not, I don't do this. Like you, if you follow my channel, you know, everything I'm saying is just going to be, it's going to be in the description. He's making these claims. He's not backing them up. So I don't have an actual research study that I can look at. So I'm going to do my best, though, to show you what is true and what isn't. So it's not true what he said about the hate crimes. This sermon could absolutely be spoken in Sweden. But I might have actually figured out where he got this information, and it's not from a research study. Let me show you this. This is an article in the Christian Post. And it quotes someone called Dr. Michelle Cretella, the executive director of the American College of Pediatrics. Now, that sounds like a super professional organization, doesn't it? That's probably what the pediatricians in America go to as their professional organization. It sounds like that, doesn't it? It does sound like that, but it's not. It's the American Academy of Pediatrics. That's the actual legitimate professional organization where you go to get CEUs, where everybody joins when they're actually a professional in that field. But the American College of Pediatricians, they don't even have professionals in every state. They do not provide their own training. They don't provide those kinds of professional resources. They were established for political reasons, and they essentially work to put out articles that appear to be from a professional organization and information like this that appears to be from a legitimate professional organization making statements that are negative towards the LGBTQ community and some other communities as well. That's essentially who they are and what they do. And they were quoted here in the Christian Post saying that basically the same exact thing that he just said. And it says that she pointed out that Sweden is the most LGBTQ affirming nation in the world, and yet mental illness and suicide rates in Sweden are just as dramatically elevated relative to the general population. Yeah, so she's saying that the higher rates are because of what the LGBTQ people are doing. It's just inherent in being LGBTQ, which is, of course, what he's applying here when he says, why is that? And leaves a pause. So it's very likely that he got it from this source or another similar source. Problem is, I went to the American College of Pediatrics website and I tried to find them writing about it so I could find where's the research article about this? I want to see what the original research is, and I couldn't find it on their website either. I mean, if any of you can do some better sleuthing, please put it in the comments. So it's just really frustrating to me when people make these statements and they don't back it up. So let's look at what the research actually does say. And here's what the research does say. This is a robust finding with lots and lots of research in thousands and thousands of people. And it is showing that the suicide rates are falling as acceptance within society in Sweden grows. Now, his implication that things have been better in Sweden for decades in itself is completely false. There have been laws in place that have increasingly been more protective, but same-sex weddings weren't protected until 2009. Anti-discrimination laws not until 2011. So that's not decades. That's actually a little bit more than 1 decade. And so again, it just seems like almost everything that comes out of this guy's mouth is false. It's just factually incorrect, which is wild because he's saying you got to speak the truth and then you got to use love. So apparently love is a tool to be used to speak the truth, but he's not even speaking the truth. And if he really had love, then he would make sure he got these things right, as he was speaking about a minority group that is discriminated against. He wouldn't be saying these things that are false and implying that there's something inherent in who we are or inherent in our relationships that causes us to have struggles and mental health problems. And further, what this also demonstrates, the fact that these suicide rates go down as the stigma decreases in society, it actually shows that there's something wrong with the cisgender heterosexual people in society that have been causing this discrimination in the first place. This is part of what infuriates me about this so much, is there's such intense scrutiny against the LGBTQ community. But someone like this never turns that around to look at himself and says, man, what have we been doing? How have we been causing harm? What can we better do to embody the love of Jesus Christ for these people? How can we make their lives better? A person like this never turns it around and says, maybe there's some problems in the straight community. It's just so disheartening to me. And it's really hard for me that people listen to messages like this. Lots of people listen to messages like this and can't see through it and don't check the references and don't realize that these are lies. He might not know these are lies. He might trust institutions like the Christian Post that are publishing false information, but he hasn't bothered to find out if what he's saying is actually the truth or not. And he's perfectly willing to stigmatize us, like to stigmatize real human beings who are just trying to get along in life, which actually disproves his entire point that everything is fine and just fine for Christians today, because this guy has a big church and there's lots of churches that preach messages like this. And there's lots of people in America who look at people like me in this way. And he's actually perpetuating this, even as he's saying it doesn't exist.
What if instead of me being mean to you, what if what I'm sharing you right now is I have loved you more than anyone else in your life? Because I'm sharing with you how much God loves you.
This, what he just said, is why suicide rates are such a problem. Not only is he stigmatizing people, not only is he lying about who we are, but he's saying that it's love. And he is willing to say that I'm the most loving person someone has ever had in their life, even as he says these awful, terrible things about people. Can you imagine believing that? Can you imagine believing every word that comes out of this man's mouth about who you are as a person, about what he says about queer people, having love used as a tool against you in that way, and then being told no one has loved you more than I have? This is the best you're ever going to get. Can you imagine a father treating their 18-year-old, their 16-year-old, their 15-year-old, their 13-year-old child that way? Can you imagine that? Talk about gaslighting. Talk about making someone feel like they're just worthless. This is why people struggle. He is a living demonstration of the very things he says do not exist. This is why. And this is why I do these videos, because there are kids in this audience listening to this message that this man spoke who are queer and whose parents are listening to it, whose parents are clapping and just agreeing with everything that he's saying. And they're sitting there with their secret. And it infuriates me because I care about those kids. Love is not a tool to me. I love them and I want them to have good lives. God have mercy. All right. Well, thank you for joining my channel. And if you have someone like this in your life, I'm sorry. You're going to have to find your love somewhere else. This is not the best that someone has ever loved you or ever will love you. It's true, the cliche. It gets so much better than this. Trust in the love of God, that God sees you, that God loves you, that God cares about you, that you are redeemable by God. And thank you for being here. And I hope that you, with me, realize how important this message is. All right. Talk to you later.